Well, Rob Oakeshott warned the 43rd Parliament would be beautiful in its ugliness. And this week, we got to see it in action for the first time. To discuss the events of the week, I'm joined from Canberra by Trade Minister Craig Emerson and from Brisbane by the Shadow Attorney-General, Senator George Brandis. Gentlemen, welcome to you both.
Hello, thanks for having me on the program.
Well, George Brandis, we repeat grand finals in Australia if there's a draw, but not elections. One of your side this week, I think, has said it would be weeks and not months that a Gillard government would last. That's got to be a tad optimistic, hasn't it?
Well, it's not my view. My view is that the government, having been assembled in the unusual and rather precarious way in which it has been assembled, is digging in, and we and the opposition, of course, will fulfil our role. We will hold everything the government does against a very strict national interest test. We will oppose the government's measures where we consider that they are against the national interest. We will selectively support the government's measures where we consider that they are in the national interest. But this parliament, Tiki, will be a vigorous one, and a vigorous parliament is a good thing for democracy.
There was also a lot of talk of cooperation and even love around. But, Craig Emerson, we got a taste of how the House will work this last week, the despairing of pairing, and a changed man in Harry Jenkins, the Speaker. He got a Dirty Harry label, which I think is going to be hard to drop. He pointed out today that quite clearly that he was not one of the elite group of three that drew up the reforms. Pyne, Albanese and Oakeshott were responsible for that. Should the Prime Minister have hung him out to dry for 2 weeks?
Well, Harry was elected as the Speaker unanimously, in fact, and that's a testament to his abilities. I thank the Coalition for voting for him, because indeed the Coalition formed the view that Mr Jenkins was a good and impartial Speaker. We did then have an election for the Deputy Speaker's position. The Coalition nominated Bruce Scott, Labor nominated Peter Slipper. I think the result of that vote, interestingly, far from being an unanimous one, was 78 votes to 71, which means that most, if not all, of the independents supported the Labor's nomination, and either one independent did not or two coalition members did not. So I think we do live in a very different and changed world, and we'll do our best to manage this. So I think there are two voices from the coalition on this. The reasonable voice that George just articulated. Only a few days ago he said that this government has all the legitimacy of the Pakistan cricket team. That's the alternative view, and I think the one that Tony Abbott embraces. He's still sulking as a result of the Australian people not electing him. He's obviously angry with that. I hope that common sense prevails. I hope the George Brandis view expressed tonight prevails, and that is holding the government to account but not trying to wreck the joint.
Well, I wouldn't want the sharp point here to be buried in all this sweet reasonableness, Tiki. The fact is that when it came to the election of the Speaker, as you rightly pointed out to Craig, the Labor Party was prepared to cut Harry Jenkins' throat for political opportunism, and were only prevented from doing that because the opposition dug its toes in. And there is also one other victim of Julia Gillard's cynicism who's not been acknowledged in much of the public commentary about this, and that is Anna Burke. Anna Burke, the Labor member for Chisholm, who had been the Deputy Speaker in the last Parliament. Her throat was cut by Julia Gillard as well, so that she could attempt, without success, to embarrass the opposition by putting up one of our own. So
that's quite right,
Harry Jenkins barely survived Julia Gillard's knife. Anna Burke didn't.
That's quite right, isn't it, Craig Emerson?
I reckon a unanimous vote is a little bit better than a bare survival.
But so that's not the way it was meant to be, and you know
so
that,
So much
Craig.
for the kinder, gentler Parliament and the sorts of language that George is using about people's throats being cut. I actually think that the week was, while in places robust, it was operating under new standing orders. Answers were limited to 4 minutes. Questions were limited to 30 seconds. And I think it was reasonably civil, and I hope that the Coalition will take a constructive approach. In relation to Anna Burke, Anna's quite relaxed about what has happened here. The Coalition now has a Deputy Speaker and a second Deputy Speaker, and in fact on that day Christopher Pyne, the Manager of the Opposition business, said this is a red letter day, it's a fantastic day for the coalition. Of course, that's what they wanted. Then there's a party room meeting at which Mr Abbott said to the coalition members, don't take your wrath out on Mr Slipper. So again, we've got two voices. Mr Abbott saying, I know everyone's really angry about the election of Mr Slipper, but don't take your wrath out on him because he might not see the funny side of that.
Well, George Brandis,
on the other hand, Christopher Pyne saying, well, it was all wonderful and this was our plan all along.
George Brandis, you were slightly shirt-fronted, weren't you, by the election of Peter Slipper. What do you think of Peter Slipper's decision?
Well, look, the fact is that Mr Slipper is a member of the coalition. He was elected as a member of the coalition, and very significantly, the following day, when there was a vote on some changes to the standing orders, which the coalition in fact won, Mr Slipper voted with the coalition, which is as we would have expected of him. But Craig said before, all this talk about people's throats being cut doesn't bode well. All the cutting of throats was being done by the Labor Party to other Labor Party colleagues.
Well, what are you expecting from Peter Slipper, George Brandis? Are you concerned that he might have done some sort of a deal with Labor? Why would Labor have put him in?
Mr Slipper stood up in the Parliament after his election and he gave what I thought was a dignified speech, and he stated categorically that he had done no deals, and I'm prepared to take him at his word. I've known Mr Slipper for a very long time. I know what his politics are. He is not a Labor Party person. He is proudly, as he will tell you himself, a Conservative.
Craig Emerson, are there any deals done with Peter Slipper?
No, and I think George is right there. Mr Slipper said there weren't. Our side said there weren't any deals done. Mr Abbott said that there weren't any deals done. So I think on one issue there's bipartisan support that no deals were in fact done in relation to Mr Slipper. So again, we'll see how it pans out. Let's just hope that common sense does prevail. Of course, George, I accept that the role of an opposition in an adversarial parliamentary democracy is to hold the government of the day to account. That's right, and to develop alternative policies. We'd like to see some of those in due course, but we really are
saw a lot of them during the election.
Mr Abbott, we saw a lot of slogans actually, but and also an $11 billion black hole for which the opposition was finally called to account by the independents, insisting that Treasury advice on the coalition's costings be released to them, which it was, and it exposed a black hole in the range of
Craig,
$7 to $11 billion.
All right, well, now let's pull back. Let's pull back from the business.
You're refighting the last war, Craig, I think.
Let's pull back from the business of the House at the moment.
That you were telling us that you had when you took to the election.
Can I move on, please, and ask George Brandis a more general question? I mean, it's quite clear that the opposition leader, Tony Abbott, ran a very, very successful election campaign, even though you didn't actually get the gong in the end. But since then, Julia Gillard has had all the wins, surely, in terms of ending up with the Prime Ministerial chair, securing the independence, even putting in Peter Slipper. Are you being outmanoeuvred?
Well, I wouldn't say that when, for the first time since 1962, on Wednesday, a government was defeated on the floor of the House of Representatives. Now, it was on a procedural matter. It was, I freely concede, largely a symbolic defeat. But that certainly, for the first time in half a century, for a government to be defeated on the floor of the House of Representatives doesn't suggest that the opposition is being outmanoeuvred. And I must say that I think one of the big stories to come out of the week was the tactical brilliance of the manager of opposition business, Christopher Pyne, in orchestrating that particular defeat for the Gillard government. What it tells us, Ticky, frankly, is that this is a highly dynamic parliamentary situation, highly predictable one. I think we already knew that. A journalist actually said to me yesterday that one of the fascinating things about this parliament is that whereas in previous parliaments the journalists were really only interested in watching Question Time, they have to watch Parliament all the time because they never know when something exciting might happen.
Craig Emerson, I guess the fear now is the odd by-election. Kevin Rudd gets tapped on the shoulder by the UN or something like that.
Oh, well, I think that's, I'm not commenting on Kevin Rudd. I mean, in the sense that I have been working with Kevin as the Trade Minister. We've already had several very constructive meetings. He's been to New York. I've been to New York and Washington, and you'll see a very productive relationship there from Australia's Foreign Minister, Australia's Trade Minister and Australia's Prime Minister and the rest of the front bench, and indeed the whole caucus. This is a caucus that is united, but I think the really important point to make here, Ticky, is that it's all very fascinating, these manoeuvres and about how Labor was defeated, as George says, on a procedural matter. I think what the Australian people want to see is a government governing and being able to govern, and an opposition calling the government to account.
Well, what the Australian people have seen, what the Australian people have seen,
rather than with the ongoing fascination with manoeuvres. That's the point I'm making.
What the Australian people have seen thus far is one very large broken promise by the Prime Minister in terms of reconsidering now a carbon price. Is this the first of many?
What actually happened in relation to putting a price on carbon is that your viewers will remember that Julia Gillard said during the election campaign, we will seek to build a consensus about putting a price on carbon. That's what she said. We've set up a committee. We've set up a committee which is not a Labor committee alone, nor Labor Green, but Labor, Green, Independents, and if we can find two members of the coalition who believe, other than Mr Abbott's view, that climate change is absolute crap, then they would be welcome onto the committee too.
George Brandis?
And that is designed to build a consensus around putting a price on carbon.
Well, may I go, Craig? The committee is a fraud.
Absolutely.
And the committee is a fraud, and everybody who's followed this debate knows it, because the conclusions of the committee are foreordained. The parameters, the terms of reference of the committee are very low. You have to accept the desirability of a particular of a carbon tax in order to get a Guernsey on this committee. Now the coalition
That's not true.
doesn't. The coalition, it is true, you read the terms of reference. The coalition does not support a carbon tax, and we haven't walked both sides of the street on this issue as the Labor Party has done. The Prime Minister, during the course of the election campaign, on several occasions, including on ABC programs, unequivocally ruled out a carbon tax. In the post-election period, when she was negotiating with the independents, she unequivocally ruled out a carbon tax. There were no ifs, buts or maybes, no weasel words, no get out of jail clauses. As soon as she'd stitched up the deal with the independents, within a week she was saying, oh well, that it's a new political environment, all bets are off, we don't have to keep any of our promises,
We're limited to 4
everything
minutes
is
in
up
our
to
answers
grabs.
in the Parliament, George.
All right, well let me move